A simple woman in a plain cream dress stood frozen as laughter echoed around her. "Who invited her?" someone whispered loudly. The elite of Boston glanced at her with disdain, champagne glasses in hand. Little did they know, Vivian Bennett was about to change everything with one check. Vivian "Viv" Bennett had never been one for extravagance. At 38, she lived in a modest brownstone in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, drove a 10-year-old Volvo, and preferred coffee shops to five-star restaurants. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of practical basics: simple dresses, comfortable shoes, and cardigans that had seen better days. Few people knew that this unassuming woman had built health tech solutions from nothing into a billion-dollar company that revolutionized patient care systems across America. Viv preferred to remain behind the scenes, letting her business partner Marcus handle the public relations and media appearances. "You're the brains, I'm the face," Marcus often joked. And Viv was perfectly content with this arrangement. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Viv sat cross-legged on her office floor, surrounded by paperwork. Her company had just finalized another successful quarter, and she was reviewing potential charitable causes to support. "Cancer research, education initiatives, homeless shelters," she murmured, sifting through folders. Her assistant, Tessa, watched from the doorway. "You know, most CEOs have their philanthropy departments handle this," Tessa remarked, setting down a cup of tea beside her boss. Viv smiled without looking up. Most CEOs don't care where their tax write-offs go. The truth was, philanthropy wasn't just a corporate obligation for Viv. It was deeply personal. 20 years ago, her younger brother Jamie had lost his battle with leukemia. She'd watched helplessly as medical bills bankrupted her parents, who had worked honest jobs their entire lives. That experience had fueled both her business vision and her commitment to giving back. "There's a difference between signing checks and making change," Viv often said. She'd donated millions over the years, always anonymously. The money went directly to causes she thoroughly researched, with minimal fanfare and no buildings named in her honor. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel Peterson, a former programmer who'd worked for her company before moving to a position at the Children's Cancer Research Foundation. "Just checking if you're coming tomorrow night. The Peterson Child Cancer Gala is the event of the season, and we're hoping to raise enough for the new research wing." Viv hesitated. She avoided society events like the plague: too much small talk, too many judgmental glances at her simple attire, and unpolished manners. But Daniel had been an exceptional employee, and more importantly, the cause resonated deeply with her. "I'll be there," she texted back, already feeling a knot form in her stomach. Little did she know that her decision would set in motion events that would leave Boston's elite society stunned into silence. "You're actually going?" Tessa's eyes widened as she stood in the doorway of Viv's modest office the next morning. "You hate these society functions." Viv continued typing on her laptop, not looking up. "The Peterson Gala supports pediatric cancer research. Jamie would have been 32 this year." Her voice softened at the mention of her brother. Tessa nodded, understanding immediately. "What will you wear?" This made Viv pause. Her wardrobe wasn't exactly filled with gala-appropriate attire. "I have that cream dress from Marcus's wedding." "That was 3 years ago." "And I've worn it exactly once," Viv countered. "It's perfectly good." Tessa sighed, knowing better than to push. Vivian Bennett, worth billions on paper, shopped at department stores during sales and kept clothes until they fell apart. A habit from her childhood, when money was tight and waste was unthinkable. Later that afternoon, Daniel called, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Viv, I can't believe you're actually coming. I've put you at table 16. "Not at the front, I hope," Viv said, immediately concerned. Daniel laughed. No, I know better than that. It's toward the back, but still a good table. The Whitakers will be there. They run that investment firm downtown. And the Prestons, they're major donors." "Sounds fine," Viv replied, though the thought of making small talk with Boston's elite made her stomach clench. "Just don't introduce me as the CEO of health tech." "Never. As far as anyone knows, you're just an old friend who works in tech." "Promise." After hanging up, Viv stared at the silent phone, wondering if she'd made a mistake. Society events like the Peterson Gala were notorious for their hierarchy. People were judged by their clothes, their jewelry, their connections. It was everything Viv despised. But then she thought of the children in cancer wards, like Jamie had been. She thought of terrified parents signing forms they couldn't afford, mortgaging homes, draining savings, all for a chance to save their child. It's just one night, she told herself firmly. At 7 the next evening, Viv stood in front of her bathroom mirror, appraising her reflection with a critical eye. The cream-colored dress was simple but elegant, with a modest neckline and buttons down the front. Her blonde hair fell in natural waves to her shoulders. She hadn't bothered with a stylist. The only makeup she wore was a touch of mascara and some lipstick. No jewelry except her mother's small pearl earrings. No designer handbag, just a plain clutch. She looked nice, presentable, certainly not like someone who could write a check for millions without blinking an eye. Her phone chimed with a text from the car service. Daniel had insisted on sending a car, though Viv would have been perfectly happy taking a rideshare. As the sleek black sedan pulled away from her brownstone, Viv felt oddly vulnerable. In her everyday life, she moved through the world unrecognized, unnoticed. Her wealth was abstract, numbers on a statement, not something visible on her person. Tonight, she would be stepping into a world where worth was measured by appearance, a world where her simple dress and unadorned wrists would immediately mark her as an outsider. "The Four Seasons Hotel, ma'am," the driver confirmed, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. Viv nodded, a strange sense of foreboding settling over her. Yes, the Peterson Gala. As the car glided through Boston's evening traffic, she mentally prepared herself for what was to come, unaware that this night would end very differently than she imagined. The Four Seasons Hotel ballroom had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music nearly drowned out by the buzz of conversation and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Viv stood at the entrance, invitation clutched tightly in hand. Already she felt out of place. Women draped in designer gowns and sparkling jewels air-kissed each other, while men in perfectly tailored tuxedos discussed stock portfolios and summer homes. "Name, please." The hostess at the check-in table wore a practiced smile. "Vivian Bennett." The woman scanned her list, her perfectly manicured nail moving down the page. Bennett, yes, table 16. Her smile faltered slightly as she took in Viv's simple appearance. "In the back," she added unnecessarily. Viv thanked her and moved into the crowd, keenly aware of the sidelong glances. She could almost hear the unspoken questions. Who is she? Why is she dressed like that? Doesn't she know this is a black tie event? "Vivian," Daniel's familiar voice cut through her discomfort. He appeared beside her, looking handsome in his tuxedo. "You made it." "I said I would," she replied, genuinely happy to see her former employee. Daniel had been one of her best programmers before his wife's battle with cancer had inspired him to change careers. "Come, let me show you to your table. The auction starts in an hour, and the speaker lineup is incredible." His enthusiasm was contagious, momentarily distracting Viv from her self-consciousness. As they weaved through tables, Viv noticed the shift in atmosphere. Near the entrance, where the most expensive tables were located, the guests exuded old money and influence. The further back they walked, the less rarefied the air became. Table 16 was positioned near the back of the ballroom, as promised. Already seated were 3 couples, all impeccably dressed and deep in conversation. They looked up as Daniel approached. "Everyone, this is my friend Vivian Bennett," Daniel announced. "Viv, meet the Whitakers, the Prestons, and the Caldwells." A chorus of polite hellos followed, though Viv didn't miss the quick once-overs, the raised eyebrows, the exchange of glances. She'd seen it all before, the instant assessment and dismissal. "Vivian works in technology," Daniel added, before being called away by another guest. "How interesting," said Mrs. Whitaker, a slim woman with silver hair twisted into an elaborate updo. "What exactly do you do?" "Software development," Viv replied simply, taking her seat. She'd learned long ago that less information led to fewer questions. "My nephew is into computers," Mr. Preston commented, as if technology were a childish hobby rather than a global industry. Conversation resumed around her, with Viv occasionally nodding or offering brief responses when directly addressed. She was used to this, being overlooked, underestimated. Usually it didn't bother her. Tonight, though, surrounded by people who measured worth by appearances, it stung more than she cared to admit. She watched as guests mingled, noting how effortlessly they navigated this social landscape. A woman in a striking red gown laughed too loudly at a balding man's joke. A silver-haired gentleman whispered something to a server, who quickly replaced his champagne with a different vintage. It was a choreographed dance of wealth and status, and Viv was clearly offbeat. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her thoughts. A server stood beside her, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but I've been asked to verify. Are you sure you're at the correct table?" The question hung in the air. Across the table, Mrs. Whitaker smirked behind her champagne glass. "I assure you I'm at the correct table," Viv replied evenly, though heat crept up her neck. "Table 16. The server shifted uncomfortably. "It's just that this section is reserved for certain donors and I have an invitation," Viv finished firmly, producing the embossed card from her clutch. The server examined it, then nodded stiffly. "My apologies, Miss Bennett." He retreated, but the damage was done. A heavy silence fell over table 16, broken only when Victoria Whitaker leaned toward her husband. "Really, the standards have slipped this year. I remember when the Peterson Gala was exclusive. The comment wasn't meant to be overheard, but it carried just enough for Viv to catch." The Prestons exchanged meaningful glances while Mrs. Caldwell suddenly became very interested in her napkin. Viv took a slow sip of water, her face carefully neutral. She was no stranger to dismissal. She'd faced it throughout her career, especially in the early days when she was a female programmer in a male-dominated field. But there was something particularly cutting about being judged solely on appearance by people who knew nothing about her. The awkwardness was mercifully interrupted by the arrival of dinner. As plates of seared scallops were placed before each guest, conversation resumed, though Viv noticed she was now being actively excluded. "Margaret's daughter just got accepted to Harvard," Mrs. Preston announced. "Legacy, of course." "Of course," Mrs. Whitaker nodded approvingly. "Where did you attend, Ms.?" She turned to Viv with raised eyebrows, clearly having forgotten her name already. "Bennett," Viv supplied. "I didn't finish college, actually." The shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. "Oh," said Mrs. Whitaker, as if Viv had admitted to a criminal record. "How unusual." Mr. Preston cleared his throat. "Self-taught, then? There's something to be said for determination." His condescension was so thick Viv could almost touch it. She merely nodded and returned to her meal. As dinner progressed, Viv became increasingly invisible to her table mates. They discussed vacation homes in the Hamptons, private school admissions, and yacht clubs, conversations deliberately designed to exclude outsiders. Midway through the main course, a commotion near the front caught everyone's attention. A photographer was taking pictures of the VIP tables, with guests posing elegantly beside the event's major donors. Who invited her? The question, just loud enough to be heard, came from a woman at the next table who was staring directly at Viv. The woman's companions turned to look, not bothering to hide their amusement at Viv's plain dress and simple hairstyle. A ripple of laughter spread, and Viv found herself the center of unwanted attention. Eyes turned her way, some curious, others openly derisive. Probably someone's housekeeper who got confused about the date, a man in an expensive suit stage whispered, generating more laughter. Viv sat perfectly still, her face expressionless, though her chest tightened painfully. The moment stretched on, a frozen tableau of her at the center of cruel amusement. Daniel, noticing the commotion from across the room, started making his way toward her table, concern etched on his face. But before he could reach her, the evening's MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. It's time to begin our pledge drive for the new Children's Cancer Research Wing." The laughter subsided, though Viv could still feel eyes on her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was here. It wasn't about these people or their opinions. It was about the children fighting cancer, about families like hers had been. With renewed resolve, she straightened her shoulders and focused on the stage, ignoring the whispers that continued around her. As the pledge drive began, a sleek promotional video played on large screens throughout the ballroom. Images of children battling cancer filled the room, their brave smiles, their hopeful eyes, their parents' love and determination. The video ended with an architectural rendering of the proposed research wing, a state-of-the-art facility that would help develop new treatments. Our goal tonight, announced the MC, is to raise $5 million toward the $10 million needed to break ground. Who will start us off? Hands began to rise, with donations ranging from 5 to 6 figures. Each pledge was met with applause, the larger ones earning standing ovations. At table 16, the Whitakers pledged $50,000 to appreciative murmurs. The Prestons followed with $75,000, while the Caldwells offered $100,000. And you, dear? Mrs. Whitaker turned to Viv with a condescending smile. Perhaps you could manage $100? Every little bit helps. Viv didn't respond to the jab. Instead, she studied the pledge card before her, calculating in her head. The children in the video reminded her so much of Jamie, their thinning hair, their too wise eyes, their fragile bodies housing indomitable spirits. Daniel appeared at her side, looking apologetic. I'm so sorry about all this, he whispered. I had no idea they would be so. It's fine, Viv interrupted gently. The cause is what matters. He nodded gratefully. The foundation does amazing work. Every dollar goes directly to research, not administrative costs or fancy parties. He gestured around the ballroom with a wry smile. Who oversees the research program? Viv asked. Dr. Eleanor Chen. She's brilliant. Developed a treatment protocol that's improved survival rates by 30% in some aggressive childhood leukemias. She's here tonight. Daniel pointed to a modest Asian woman in a simple black dress speaking with the MC. Something in Dr. Chen's focused expression reminded Viv of herself, the look of someone more concerned with substance than appearance. As Daniel was called away again, Viv noticed Victoria Whitaker watching her with thinly veiled contempt. It's remarkable, isn't it? Mrs. Whitaker said loudly to her companions. How some people attend these events without contributing meaningfully, almost as if they're here for the free dinner. The table erupted in muffled laughter, which died abruptly when Viv finally spoke. I was just thinking the same thing, she said calmly, meeting Mrs. Whitaker's gaze, about people who seem more interested in being seen than in actually helping children. Mrs. Whitaker's face flushed crimson. Well, I never... But she was interrupted by the MC's voice booming through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now at $3 million. We're still $2 million short of tonight's goal. Who will help us close the gap? Viv quietly raised her hand, though no one at her table noticed. Yes, the lady in the cream dress at table 16, the MC called out, pointing directly at Viv. All eyes turned toward the back of the room. Viv stood, her posture relaxed but confident. And your pledge amount, ma'am? The MC prompted, pen poised over his notepad. $10 million, Viv stated clearly. A stunned silence fell over the ballroom. The MC blinked rapidly as if he'd misheard. I'm sorry. Did you say 10 million? Viv repeated. That should cover the entire research wing, with some left over for operating costs in the first year. Whispers erupted across the room. At table 16, Mrs. Whitaker's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Mr. Preston's jaw literally dropped. The MC fumbled with his notes. That's incredibly generous, Ms. Bennett, Vivian Bennett. A man near the front suddenly stood up, his face lighting with recognition. Wait, Vivian Bennett of Health Tech Solutions? The whispers grew louder. Viv nodded once, maintaining her composure. The Vivian Bennett? The man continued, his voice carrying across the now silent room. The founder and CEO who revolutionized cancer treatment protocols with integrated patient data systems? Yes, Daniel confirmed proudly, stepping forward. That's exactly who she is. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted dramatically. Faces that had been dismissive or mocking moments ago now showed shock, embarrassment, and, in some cases, a hasty recalibration to respect. Dr. Eleanor Chen pushed through the crowd, approaching Viv with genuine emotion in her eyes. Ms. Bennett, your software has saved countless lives by identifying treatment patterns we never would have seen otherwise. And now this donation? She seemed at a loss for words. Victoria Whitaker stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. Vivian, I had no idea. We had no idea. Clearly, Viv replied simply. Mr. Preston attempted damage control. If we had known who you were, then you would have treated me differently, Viv finished for him. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? The Caldwells looked at their plates, too mortified to speak. Around them, the room buzzed with activity as people tried to position themselves closer to Viv, suddenly eager to be associated with the unassuming billionaire in their midst. Daniel beamed at his former boss, not surprised in the least by her generosity. He'd known who she was all along, of course, but had respected her wish for anonymity. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice cracking with emotion, "thanks to the extraordinary generosity of Ms. Vivian Bennett, founder of Health Tech Solutions, we have not only met our goal for the evening, but exceeded it. The Peterson Children's Cancer Research Wing will become a reality." The ballroom erupted in applause, though many of the clapping hands belonged to people who had been laughing at Viv only minutes before. As the initial shock wore off, the ballroom became a flurry of activity. The event photographer, who had pointedly ignored Viv earlier, now hovered nearby, angling for a shot. Guests who had whispered behind their hands now approached with business cards and effusive compliments. Through it all, Viv maintained her quiet dignity. She spoke at length with Dr. Chen about the research wing's priorities, genuinely engaged in the conversation while politely but firmly deflecting social climbers. Victoria Whitaker made 3 separate attempts to reintroduce herself, each one met with Viv's courteous but distant acknowledgement. "I hope there are no hard feelings," Mrs. Whitaker eventually said, her voice honeyed with false warmth. "If I'd only known who you were—" "That's exactly the point, isn't it?" Viv interrupted gently. "We shouldn't need to know someone's net worth to treat them with basic courtesy." Mrs. Whitaker flushed, opening her mouth to respond, but finding no words. Near the end of the evening, Viv found herself momentarily alone with Daniel. "You could have told them who I was," she said. "Save me from being the evening's entertainment." Daniel shook his head. "Would you have wanted that? To be treated differently because of your money rather than who you are?" Viv smiled, genuinely this time. "Number?" And tonight confirmed why. As she prepared to leave, the MC asked if she would like to address the crowd. Viv hesitated, then stepped up to the microphone. "My brother Jamie died of leukemia when he was 12, she said simply. "Tonight isn't about me or my donation. It's about making sure other families don't experience what mine did. Judge people by their character, not their clothes or their bank accounts. Sometimes the person you least expect is the one with the most to offer." With those words, she handed Dr. Chen a check, nodded once to the silent crowd, and walked out of the ballroom, leaving Boston's elite to reflect on the woman they had so quickly dismissed. Some battles are won, not with loud confrontation, but with quiet dignity. Vivian Bennett taught Boston's elite a powerful lesson about judging others by appearance, a reminder we all need sometimes. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for more powerful tales of resilience and justice. Remember, true worth isn't measured by clothes or jewelry, but by character and actions. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that appearances never tell the whole story. Until next time, thanks for watching.